Joining me now is best-selling author and political commentator Douglas Murray. Douglas, you've been in southern Lebanon in recent days, and I'll ask you about the latest on Israel's war with Hamas and Hezbollah shortly. But first to Kamala Harris. She has a man problem, including a black man problem, and it's got her contemplating reparations.
We all know that America became great, off the backs of free black labor.
So my agenda, well, first of all, on the point of reparations, it has to be studied. There's no question about that. And I've been very clear about that position.
Douglas, is that going to speak to black men? And more importantly, should the American president be contemplating reparations?
No, I mean, the reparations argument was brought back about 10 years ago by the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, really, who kicked the latest round of it off in a piece in the Atlantic. He recently distinguished himself with an even less impressive piece of research and writing. But the minute he started that off again, this wild idea went around once again in America that, and indeed around the rest of the world, that some people are owed money by dint of their racial heritage, and that somehow the country they're in should pay them cash. The interesting thing about this is, Rita, is that firstly, it's about as divisive a racial policy as anyone could come up with. I mean, first of all, how do people think actually that race relations in America that have been steadily improving for many decades would be improved at this stage if one section, or indeed all other sections of the taxpaying community, had to just give large amounts of cash to another section of the community, to another community? How do they think that that would go down exactly? And the second thing is, by the way, it's impossible because you have to get everyone. Don't forget, Kamala said that people can't, the black people in America can't get to a Xerox machine before the last election to do a copy of their passport to prove their identity at the polls. So how exactly do they think they're going to do the genetic and DNA and family tree heritage testing to find out exactly who should be paid reparations? And then thirdly, the people who have actually looked into this, which is just such a weaselly way for Kamala to try to dodge this one. The people who have tried to look into it, like the state of California, even radical Gavin Newsom in California has not instituted the reparations that were suggested, because the suggestion that his committee came up with was that millions and millions of dollars should be given to people of African-American heritage. And it wasn't going to work. I mean, it would bankrupt the state, but it also just wouldn't work. So people have looked into it, Rita. They really have. And nobody has come away thinking that this divisive policy is remotely a good idea. Kamala Harris is simply pandering at the moment to a part of the vote. I think, among other things, it's terrible because it's not just pandering, it's also putting a victim mentality into a community that does not need that. It needs to have sections of it, by no means all of it. Sections of it needs to be raised up. They do not need promise of a massive cash bonanza someday down the road if they vote Democrat.
Well, last time around 2020, we had the BLM riots raging throughout that year in the lead up to the election. Race is again an issue. Democrats are desperate for it to be an issue, and their media mouthpieces, I've got to say, particularly in the past few days, have really turned up the heat on this issue, maligning minorities who are considering voting for Trump. Here is the View's Sunny Hostin and MSNBC anchor Joy Reid.
We've got to reach those ridiculous, crazy black men that did vote for Trump. We've got to reach those people.
This race will be far too close because, unfortunately, we do have a fascist groundswell in parts of this country, mainly among white men, let's be clear, but in small pockets among black and brown men, too. This happens to be a global phenomenon.
There you go, black and brown men being fascists. Shame, though, can be an effective tactic, Douglas. Will it see black and Hispanic voters switch back to the Democrats or perhaps stay home and not participate in the vote?
Well, you're right. Shame can be a useful tool, not necessarily when it's wielded by Joy Reid, for instance, you just saw there. Joy Reid has called absolutely everybody a fascist. She's now on to calling black men fascists if they disagree with her. I think a lot of people can see through this. I've always been bewildered by the way in which it's accepted in America that you can talk about racial groups and the way they should vote in this way. And it's something I don't think that any other really of the democracies have. And it's obviously it's partly or largely because of America's specific racial history, but it's a really remarkable thing the way in which people are allowed to just say, you know, Black people should vote like this, you know, Latinos should vote like that. It's like, you know, women should vote this way. Why? Who? For what reason? And I think what you see there is just an attempt to just sort of get everyone in place. It's a desperate thing for Hostin and Reid and others to do. But yes, they will use any term against any people, any individuals, any group, just to get their way, to make people vote the way that they think they have to vote. I think that anyone from the communities they're speaking about should feel indignant like that. If I was told, you know, white British people of Scottish English descent have to vote a specific way, or we'll call you all fascists, I think I'd feel kind of rebellious about that, actually. And I think a lot of people in America from those communities do too.
Well, they certainly didn't react too well to Barack Obama berating them about being sexist if they don't vote for Kamala Harris. Before we move on to other issues, it's looking increasingly likely that Kamala Harris is going to appear on Joe Rogan's program, on his podcast, whose audience is massive. If you were advising her, would you recommend that she be a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience?
No, I would not. She has ducked all of the difficult interviews that she could have done. The fact that the Democrats are currently putting her out there is actually a sign that she's not doing well, or she's not doing as well as she should be doing in the polls. The Democrat plan has been hide Kamala from the cameras to any extent that you can. And specifically don't get her onto anything where there could be details expected. You can get her on The View. You can get her on a couple of other just sort of puff pieces. You can get her on the cover of Vogue, of course. But whatever you do, don't get her anywhere tough. Joe Rogan is an extraordinarily talented podcaster and interviewer. And he's interesting because, among other things, he just follows things where they lead. Now, I sometimes disagree with where he follows them, and certainly where many of his guests have followed them. But the point is it's an extraordinarily free-rolling conversation. Kamala Harris hasn't been exposed to a free-rolling conversation in her time in elected office. And that's because when she rolls, frankly, she rolls all over the place. And what's more, I mean, I'm sure her team will say cut, you know, after an hour. But if this was going to be one of Joe Rogan's mega podcasts, where he runs to 3 hours fairly easily, what are the odds that Kamala Harris will not say at least one thing during those hours, which is so off the beaten track and makes so little sense that it's actually a massive liability for her and her campaign? I would say very high, very high. So, you know, maybe she is toying with it, but wow, is it a bad idea? Because nobody, among other things, nobody can put up with hearing someone talking about the sort of banalities and the just completely inexact policies or claims of policies to come. Nobody could listen to that for 3 hours. I'm not sure if Kamala Harris could even do it for 3 hours. I mean, to
I
simply
think
just
she could.
keep off saying anything important.
That would almost be impressive if she, for 3 hours, just trots out the talking points. They grew up in a middle-class family, her childhood, her time as a prosecutor, just keeps giving the
has been.
lines. That would be unburdened by, yes, all of that. Now, Douglas, you've just been in southern Lebanon with the IDF. You've seen some of the Hezbollah tunnels with your own eyes. You wrote that in a single square kilometre, they found more than 100 tunnel shafts. It's apparent, Douglas, that Hezbollah and their Iranian backers have spent a considerable fortune on this terror infrastructure.
Well, I went into southern Lebanon, Heidi, to see this infrastructure. Hezbollah, we now know from documents or discovered in the last month, verified by all the main newspapers. Hezbollah was actually intending to do an October the 7th style attack from the north of Israel, from southern Lebanon into the north of Israel. And you can see the tunnel network it has set up in order to do such an attack. And you can see the places where they stored the rockets and much more. The thing about this that's extremely disturbing, among others, is that all of this happened literally right under the watchtowers of the so-called UN peacekeeping force, UNIFIL. And this is just for anyone who actually wants peace in the region and says, you know, why can't the war stop and so on. This is why. I was in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, 18 years ago now, when the 2006 Hezbollah war came to a close, and the United Nations resolution was that one of the prerequisites to stopping the war was that Hezbollah would not be allowed to build up its terror infrastructure, including of long and short-range rockets, in the south of Lebanon. For the next 18 years, the UN did less than nothing to ensure that resolution was abided by. Instead, they literally watched as Hezbollah dug its terror tunnel network. They literally watched as Hezbollah stored munitions where they were meant not to. They literally watched, the UN peacekeeping forces literally watched as Hezbollah fired thousands of rockets from that allegedly demilitarized area into Israel. It's all there, visibly on the ground. And it's a shocker to me that countries like Australia and Britain and others who pay for these peacekeeping forces did not spend 18 years saying, we demand that Hezbollah don't do this because they're breaking the resolution and there will be war again. And 18 years later, after 18 years of completely ineffective UN peacekeeping, here we are again. And I think it is a tragedy for the people of Lebanon, a tragedy for the people of Israel. And this is on the UN's watch. And the UN has plenty of criticisms that can be made of it. But this sort of thing is what makes you wonder whether the United Nations doesn't go the way of the League of Nations. At this stage, what can you do with an organization that is willing not only not to stop war where it can, but not even to abide by its own binding resolutions?
Will Israel ultimately defy the US and hit those Iranian nuclear targets? Is there any doubt that Iran's going to attack again, either directly or through its proxies?
I don't know. I don't have any special intel on it, as it were, but I can tell you this, that the tens of thousands of Israeli families who are now in their second year away from their homes, from the north of Israel, who in their second year of their children having their education thwarted, these people have to be allowed to return to their homes. And they can only return to their homes if Hezbollah and their backers in Iran back off or are destroyed. And it seems to me that there is no other way. Israel cannot, any more than any other country, accept the displacement of its citizens in some kind of permanent way under rocket fire. And the rocket fire is constant. Again, the international press does not focus on this, but I can tell you, Rita, every time I'm there, every time I'm here, and specifically from Haifa northwards, there's rockets all the time being fired by Hezbollah, backed by Iran. It doesn't make the international news. Somebody's killed here, somebody's killed there. And then, you read the BBC in the evening and you'll learn that something happened in Gaza. And yeah, I mean, it's just astonishing to me, this ignorance and the desire to ignore what has been going on, which is that the revolutionary government in Iran has spent all these years sending billions, perhaps $1 billion a year to Hezbollah alone, to build up their terror infrastructure in order to attack Israel. The revolutionary government is the head of the snake, and I don't know what Israel is going to do about it. I wish it weren't the case. It looked like Israel would have to do it alone, because the Iranian revolutionary government should be the pariah of the region. And from the Gulf states to Saudi Arabia to Jerusalem, it's recognized as that. Why does Washington not recognize that too and act accordingly, either to end the regime of the mullahs or at least to cripple them, as happened in Donald Trump's time in the Oval Office, cripple them and their economy to make sure they cannot raise money to spread terror across this whole region. And what's more, one final thought, colonize this whole region. All the Muppets from Colombia and elsewhere who pretend they care about colonization. Yeah. It's the mullahs that are colonizing this whole region, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and they want all of Israel too. The mullahs are a revolutionary colonialist power, and anyone should try to stop them in their aims.
Douglas Murray, very well said indeed. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.